What are some of the more prevalent signs of autoimmunity? Fatigue, brain fog, joint pain, rashes, and digestive problems. This could indicate inflammation and or autoimmunity in various tissues of the body. Now, as you may already know, autoimmunity can be loosely defined as when your immune system attacks tissue of your own body that it shouldn't. And this can result in a number of conditions like psoriasis, eczema, rheumatoid arthritis. There's even discussion that certain neurological conditions like brain fog and MCI or mild cognitive impairment may actually be underlied by autoimmunity. And of course, there's certain autoimmune conditions of the gut, which is one of the main areas we want to look to for the potential cause of autoimmunity. Now, the way this tends to play out is dysbiosis in the gut, or disruption of the ecosystem, namely by the bacteria and fungi that live there, leads to leaky gut. When the gut is leaky, meaning it's overly porous, you can have translocation of various particles from the gut into your circulation, into the bloodstream, and this activates the immune system. So dysbiosis, essentially through this domino rally, leads to an imbalance in the immune system. There's a very interesting paper from the journal Frontiers in Immunology that gives a nice schematic or a kind of flow of how this domino cascade effect works. What you're looking at here all the way over to the left, the start of the flow, is symbiosis, sometimes also described as eubiosis, meaning things are healthy. The ecosystem is healthy. The ratios of bacteria are as they should be. The immune system is calm. And essentially the garden or the rainforest that is this dense ecosystem is one of health and balance, or eubiosis. From there, we can start tipping into dysbiosis, meaning imbalanced. And one of the first things that occurs in this situation is the release of cytokines, or inflammatory signaling molecules that the immune system uses to communicate. And as part of this, other immune cells like macrophages and dendritic cells are recruited into the immune response. Now, what's interesting in particular about dendritic cells, they're also known as presenting cells. They take parts of antigens, or they take parts of food particles or tissues of your body, and they present them to the immune cells. It's kind of this, hey, look, look, immune cell, or look, police officer, is this a nefarious character? And this leads into the leaky gut, the end of the schematic here from the Frontiers journal, where we can come down to a few of the core mechanisms underlying autoimmunity, one of which can be molecular mimicry. This is where the immune system, when presented one of these potential culprits or bad guys from these presenter cells, attacks it when it shouldn't. And this is where you can see something like certain dietary triggers can lead people to have joint pain or brain fog within 30 minutes or sometimes the next day. This is the end result of this entire cascade where the wrong thing is being attacked by the immune system. Now, similar to this, there's the bystander effect. This is where in a warring situation, let's say, there's a shootout with the police, an innocent bystander may get shot by the inflammation or by the immune attack of the immune system as the immune system is trying to clean up a certain mess or pathogen or attack an antigen. And this leads to the end result of autoimmunity. And by the way, if this has been helpful, please comment and subscribe. This really does help us reach more people who are trying to improve their health. So it is quite deeply appreciated. In this first study, they looked to see is fungal overgrowth associated with this inflammation and autoimmunity. They compared healthy controls to those with Crohn's. This was in a population of kids. And they found higher levels of candida and lower levels of Saccharomyces. So there was a dysbiosis of the fungus in those with Crohn's. Now, one additional study here looking at is fungal overgrowth associated with more severe inflammation and autoimmunity. And they did find that
there were higher levels of stool fungus in those who had more active inflammatory bowel disease. Now, part of this is chicken or the egg. We don't know, at least based upon the observational data. Does this mean that the fungus is causing the autoimmunity, or is the autoimmunity skewing the population of bacteria and fungus, therefore causing the imbalance? One of these next studies at least helps us with answering this question, asking the important sort of next question that one should logically ask: will treatment of the fungus improve the inflammatory bowel disease, the inflammation, and the autoimmunity? And so in this next study, they gave either placebo or fluconazole at 200 milligrams per day, this is being a prescription antifungal, to those with ulcerative colitis. And they found after 3 weeks, there was a improvement in symptom severity and also a reduction of the inflammatory marker calprotectin. So this is now suggesting that the fungus is causal, because when we treat the fungus, the inflammation and autoimmunity improve, which is really exciting.
Now, the concept I'd like you to understand here is that there's a saying of genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger. So we can't necessarily do anything about the genetics, but we can modulate the environment. As a quick aside, if you do have autoimmunity, there's an opportunity here for you to actually appreciate the strength of your immune system. There is some research indicating that those who have autoimmunity actually have stronger immune systems and are more protected against infectious organisms. So if we were living in a non-Westernized society, let's say a hunter-gatherer society where death from infectious pathogens is somewhat common, certainly more prevalent, you would actually be a step ahead of many people because your genes are better suited for that environment. In a Western society, we have to work a little bit harder to make sure that the environment, in this case, I would argue the gut environment is one of the most important, that that environment is conducive to your genes. So remember, genetics loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger, and one of the main environmental factors that we can modulate is the health of your gut. I'm also curious, what are your thoughts on the gut autoimmune connection? I'd love to hear what you think. Let me know in the comments below. So, what are some of the more prevalent signs of autoimmunity? This is not an exhaustive list, but here are some of the cornerstone symptoms to consider: fatigue, brain fog, joint pain, rashes, and digestive problems. This could indicate inflammation and/or autoimmunity in various tissues of the body. Now, important to understand and clarify, while this can be disconcerting, I would bridle you from going to a fearful place because there is a lot that can be done. And unfortunately, I don't think in healthcare education, doctors, clinicians, gurus, what have you, always do an adequate job of parsing this. And if people have an overly fearful perspective about autoimmunity, this is antithetical to healing because it's going to stress you out, and stress definitely has an impact on your immune system and on your well-being at large. An elemental diet, we refer to this loosely in the clinic as a gut reset, is a simple way to reduce the antigens going through the gut. And as evidence for the power of this intervention, and by the way, an elemental diet is a hypoallergenic, pre-digested meal replacement. So looks very similar to a protein shake mixed with water. And you essentially subsist for a day or a couple of days exclusively or predominantly on these meal replacement shakes. This removes the antigens that those dendritic presenting cells would present to the immune system to ensue this autoimmunity cascade. What's my evidence for this? Well, there have been a couple trials that have found for either IBD or for rheumatoid arthritis, IBD being inflammatory bowel disease, autoimmunity in the gut, an elemental diet is as powerful as the steroid anti-inflammatory prednisone. So if you're not sure what diet do I do, how do I shop accordingly, a simple on-ramp to calm things down can be an elemental diet reset. Certainly not the only tool, but I think a really simple and powerful one. Now, within diet, there's a lot of disagreement about diet, of course, but there's a few tenets you've likely heard. Gluten can be a problem for some, not for all. Dairy can be a problem for some, not for all. Processed foods can be a problem, and I would argue that's probably not good for anybody. Nightshades may also be a provocating agent. The important concept here is you want to eliminate things like gluten and dairy and processed foods and perhaps nightshades, but then after the gut has healed, reintroduced. Because if the lining of your gut and the health of your gut, and we move from that leaky gut to dysbiosis back to eubiosis, you should be able to tolerate these foods. This is key because in the clinic, it's so commonplace that individuals are overly avoidant of food. If we improve the health of your gut with something like an elemental diet as one tool, you should be able to eventually broaden your diet. So the reintroduction part of this is crucial. So elemental diets as a simple reset on-ramp, an elimination diet, and from there, avoiding foods that you notice are clearly provocating of your symptoms.
How a given food or foods impact your gut and the immune system therein. Remembering that the largest density of immune cells in your entire body is in your small intestine. So this is why we see such a connection between someone's gut health and how a food is digested and inflammation. Firstly, fermented foods, which are rich in probiotics, are a great idea to incorporate into your diet, but it's also where some of the dietary nuance comes in. Firstly, let me just cover a data point here from a group of researchers at Stanford published in the prestigious journal Cell, wherein they found a high fermented food diet was actually more anti-inflammatory than a high fiber diet. Now, it's not a contest, but it just makes the point. A 2023 umbrella meta-analysis, so a very comprehensive review of the body of data, found that probiotic supplementation led to reductions in numerous inflammatory cytokines, C-reactive protein, TNF-alpha, and interleukin-6. So there's pretty good data demonstrating that either fermented foods with the probiotics they contain or a probiotic supplement can reduce inflammation. Not surprising given the impact that probiotics have on the gut and the connection between the gut, the immune system, and inflammation. The goal here would be 1 to 6 servings of fermented foods per day. Some common fermented foods: kefir, yogurt, kombucha, sauerkraut, and kimchi. This is not an exhaustive list, and some traditional cultures have more nuanced, less sort of popularly known fermented foods, and these would all generally be fine. The nuance here has to do with someone's histamine tolerance. Now, histamine is a signaling molecule of the immune system. When someone has IBS, irritable bowel, SIBO, or other food reactivity and or gastrointestinal symptoms, they're more likely to have a high baseline level of histamine because of these things going on in the gut. We know that bacterial populations, when they overgrow, themselves, the bacteria produce histamine, but also as the immune system starts reacting and trying to counterbalance this overgrowth, as part of that inflammatory immune response, histamine is also released. So for some people, they may say, boy, I've tried fermented foods and I think I felt worse. Well, you're not alone. This is something that's decently well documented. And because of this, a few specific recommendations. Firstly, this is where a probiotic supplement might be better than foods, at least in the short term, until you heal. We've also compiled this table listing foods from lowest histamine content up through the highest. Kefir is the lowest histamine containing food. Conversely, kimchi is the highest. So in order from lowest to highest, kefir, more histamine in yogurt, more in sauerkraut, and the most in kimchi. Now, maybe not surprisingly, kimchi is also the richest in probiotics. So it's not to say kimchi is good or bad, but if you are someone who perhaps notices that when you consume fermented foods, you have a runny nose, you have flushing, you have heart palpitations, you have loose bowels, you have brain fog, you have insomnia, these are all symptoms demonstrative of histamine intolerance or histamine overload. And again, at least temporarily, reducing dietary histamine content can be helpful. And we do have a full low histamine diet guide for those of you who may want to try this, remembering that if you perform the correct dietary intervention for your gut, your body will let you know within 1 to 2 weeks that it's helpful. You'll start seeing symptoms reduce. And then I would ride that dietary protocol until you plateau, you're stable for 1 or 2 months, and then start reintroducing foods. Because remember also that as your gut heals, your food tolerance should increase. The second food here that requires some nuance is foods that are high in fiber and high in prebiotics. It's not to say that fiber and prebiotics are good or bad, but in those who have sensitive digestion, they can be more prone to flaring symptoms. And this is where something like a low FODMAP diet can be quite helpful. A low FODMAP diet has been shown to be quite beneficial for gastrointestinal symptoms and allows you a food list that is most likely to be tolerated. And so this is where avoiding high prebiotic or high FODMAP foods like broccoli, cauliflower, garlic, and onions, and instead focusing on lower FODMAP, lower prebiotic foods like kale, spinach, carrots, and cucumbers can be beneficial. And a low FODMAP diet guide is not hard to find. We have one easily available, and we'll link to that in the notes. And also the University of Monash has an app where you can punch in specific foods. And here the same concept applies, wherein if it's the right dietary approach for you, you'll notice a benefit within 1 or 2 weeks. And if so, continue on that dietary plan until you peak, maintain that approach for a month or 2, and then start reintroducing foods. And it has also been demonstrated for FODMAPs that with time, tolerance improves and people can successfully reintroduce these foods. So I just want to keep issuing this reminder that food tolerance should improve over time. And then we come to glutamine-rich foods, and these are foods that can help to repair the lining of the gut. Some of the richest sources of dietary glutamine are beef, chicken, and eggs, although it may be hard from diet alone to obtain sufficient glutamine to really heal the gut. So you may want to consider adding in 5 to 15 grams per day supplementally of glutamine. We've discussed already that probiotics may reduce inflammation. If there are imbalances in the gut, this may co-occur with leakage. And on the other side, the immune system is called to respond to that. So we know that in these gut syndromes like IBS, IBD, leaky gut, there can be, not guaranteed to be, but there can be increased inflammation. And that's what was interesting about this 2023 umbrella meta-analysis, which will be a touch more comprehensive than just your standard meta-analysis, as good as those are anyway, summarizing 39 randomized control trials, administering, as you can imagine, across 39 trials, different probiotics. There was blends of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. There was the healthy fungus we've discussed before, Saccharomyces. There was also a soil-based formula or formulas using bacillus. The dosages ranged from 2 billion CFU per day to 100 billion CFU per day. They found that probiotics improved multiple inflammatory markers, including C-reactive protein, TNF-alpha, and interleukin-6. Additionally, they found the most effective protocol, and by the way, it's exciting to start seeing these papers hone in on what the most effective protocols are when they examine the protocols used, as in this case, in 39 different randomized control trials. Most effective dose, 10 to 100 billion CFU per day. Most effective duration, longer than 2 to 3 months. And just to echo, as we lower inflammation, it's not surprising to see improvements in things like maybe pain or autoimmunity. But I care most about outcomes. It's interesting to see, as we just covered, reductions in CRP, reductions in TNF, reductions in IL-6. But if you had those changes on your labs and you still had joint pain or depression, you probably wouldn't be thrilled. So Interesting what happens mechanistically. Most important, what happens regarding the clinical endpoints. I'm less depressed, I'm less fatigued, I have less bloating, I have less diarrhea, etc. This next study, I think, was also relevant, looking at autoimmunity. I want to be really careful to say, we should be cautious not to paint the scenario that all autoimmunity starts in the gut. And as much of a gut health enthusiast I am, it's still important to clarify gut health and your gut will not be culpable for all autoimmunity. With that, let's go into the clinical trial here. 40 patients with multiple sclerosis were given either probiotic or placebo. The probiotic was Saccharomyces boulardii. This healthy fungus we've discussed before, 5 billion CFU per day. What do they find? Reductions in C-reactive protein. More importantly, in my view, reductions in pain and improvements in fatigue. This is a good transition to a meta-analysis because we just covered one randomized control trial. What about looking at a meta-analysis? Again, trying to get a broader view on the body of data regarding probiotics and their potential ability to improve joint pain and inflammation. This meta-analysis summarized 11 randomized control trials. People were given either a placebo, a prebiotic, or a blend of prebiotic and probiotic. And again, they're using different types of probiotics, whether it be our traditional lactobacillus and bifidobacterium type, or maybe even a soil-based probiotic, including Bacillus coagulans species. Coming to their findings, they found that either probiotics or a combination of probiotics and prebiotics all improved rheumatoid arthritis symptom severity and inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein and interleukin-1 beta. So exciting. In case you haven't heard of curcumin, this is a polyphenol, a compound from plants that gives, in this case, a very orange color. Turmeric is sort of the less isolated form, and curcumin is what's used in many supplements. Curcumin also has a long history of use in Ayurvedic medicine. But let's juxtapose sort of the traditional Ayurvedic use with randomized, current control trials. There are meta-analyses finding improvements in inflammatory bowel disease, in inflammatory markers, in joint pain, either in RA, rheumatoid arthritis, or osteoarthritis, and also small improvements on metabolic health like body weight, blood sugar, and cholesterol. Again, all likely due to that upstream modulation of NF-kappa B. Another simple and inexpensive therapy or nutritional supplement here is vitamin D. A meta-analysis summarizing 6 randomized control trials looking at about 250 participants with Hashimoto's thyroid autoimmunity found that vitamin D supplementation led to a roughly 150-point reduction in TPO, or thyroid peroxidase antibodies. Another meta-analysis, again of 6 clinical trials, looking at about 430 patients with rheumatoid arthritis, found that vitamin D supplementation led to reduced joint pain with a fairly large effect size, meaning the magnitude of the benefit, reduced disease activity with a small effect size, and also reduced inflammatory markers like ESR or erythrocyte sedimentation rate, again with a large effect size. There you have it, a number of studies. I hope they're helpful. I hope you will comment, and I'll look forward to speaking with you next time.